Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 67th presentation of the Silver Gavel Awards for Media and the Arts by the American Bar Association. My name is Steve Wormiel. I'm a professor at American University Law School in Washington, D.C. I'm honored to serve as the current chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Gavel Awards. The committee is composed of 18 ABA members who are accomplished lawyers, professors, journalists, and authors. Their work is aided by a screening committee of over 50 volunteers that conduct the initial work of the Gavel Awards before it passes on to the final committee. Each year, they are able to narrow 150 to 200 entries into the set of finalists that is screened by the final committee. Many of those people, I think, are here tonight, and if you're a screener or a member of the committee, please stand for a moment so we can thank you for your work. The American Bar Association Silver Gavel Awards recognize how much the media can do to educate the American people on the workings of the legal system and the judicial system. An informed public is essential to democracy and the rule of law. The Silver Gavel Awards are the highest honor the ABA gives for this recognition. I am pleased now to introduce my friend and the president of the American Bar Association, Mary Smith.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Steve. Well, the Silver Gavel Awards are one of the association's most important and enduring annual traditions. This year, they are being presented at this ABA annual meeting for the first time since 2005, so we're thrilled to have it again as part of the annual meeting. Since their inception in 1958, under the leadership of ABA President Charles Rhine, the Silver Gavel Awards have advanced public understanding of law and legal system, as well as the idea that liberty, justice, and the rule of law are for all. The Silver Gavels have such a remarkable history. In their first year, an American classic drama, 12 Angry Men, starring Henry Fonda as juror number 8, received a Silver Gavel. Raymond Burr, Mr. Perry Mason, accepted a Silver Gavel Award for television in 1960. Other honorees over the years include Edward R. Murrow, Ken Burns for Central Park 5, the film Just Mercy, based on Bryan Stevenson's memoir, and Anita Hill for her book, Believing. This year, we are awarding 9 Silver Gavels and citing 4 honorable mentions. Awards are being given across 9 categories of media: books, commentary, documentaries, drama and literature, magazines, multimedia, newspapers, radio, and television.
Thank you, Mary. By the way, everyone that has won a Silver Gavel Award since 1960 has had the same kind of winning record as Perry Mason. So it's my honor first to present the awards for 4 honorable mention winners. Ask you to hold your applause as we go through all 4 of them. In the category of books, The Court at War, FDR, His Justices, and the World They Made by Cliff Sloan, published by Hachette Book Group's Public Affairs. In the category of documentary, Bad Press from Okla Film, LLC, with directors Joe Peeler and Rebecca Lansbury Baker, producers Conrad Bilhars and Garrett Baker, producer and cinematographer Tyler Graham, and editor Gene Ream. In the category of multimedia, State Court Report from the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law, with Alicia Bannon, Editor-in-Chief and Founding Editor, Douglas Keith, Founding Editor, Katrina Zimbor-Wolfcott, Managing Editor, Pinky Weitzman, Vice President of Communications, Alden Wallace, Director, Creative and Design, Lisa Vosper, Director, Multimedia, Jessica Eckert, Graphic Designer, Brian Palmer, Director, Editorial, Evan Stepper, Director, Digital, and Nancy Waltzman and Chris Fisher, Consultants. And I believe that Christina is here to accept the award in person. If we weren't sure if she had arrived yet. No, I guess not here. We maybe can catch up to her when she arrives. And then the fourth category for honorable mention is also multimedia, goes to We Don't Talk About Leonard, a podcast from WNYC Radio. Andrea Bernstein, Ilya Maritz, and Andy Kroll, reporters and hosts. Katya Rogers, editor and executive producer. Molly Rosen, producer. Jesse Eisinger, editor. Sean Merchant, assistant producer. Jennifer Munson, technical director. And Jaron Paul for music and scoring. And they and other honorable mention winners are not here as of the moment. But we can give them a round of applause for all four. Thank you, and it's my pleasure now to bring President Smith back up to the podium to present the Silver Gavel Awards.
And now, the 2024 Silver Gavel Awards. I will introduce the honorees, then a video segment about the winning media will play, and after that, representatives, if they are here, may come forward to accept their awards and make brief remarks. So here we go. Here's the awards. The first Silver Gavel Award is for books, goes to Shielded, How the Police Became Untouchable by Joanna Schwartz, published by Viking Penguin. Joanna Schwartz, unfortunately, could not be with us today, but she is deeply appreciative, as you will see here.
Shielded is a book about the many barriers, shields, if you will, that have been created by the Supreme Court and by state and local governments across the country that make it so difficult for people to seek justice, even when police have violated their rights. And the idea for the book really came initially from my own experience litigating civil rights cases more than 20 years ago. My experience as a civil rights lawyer then inspired me to become a law professor and begin to study in earnest the kinds of barriers that I saw as a practicing lawyer. And then having spent more than a decade writing many law review articles about these many barriers and trying to understand how they function in real cases that are being brought by civil rights lawyers around the country, I had the inspiration to turn that legal research or reconceptualize that legal research as a book in the summer of 2020. And of course, that was when George Floyd was murdered, when there were people protesting around the country, and many legislators and journalists wanted to understand how these cases make their way through the courts and the many barriers that prevent people from getting justice in these cases. Many of these barriers are justified by assumptions about how the law works that simply are not grounded in reality. I'm really focused in the book on stories that haven't been splashed in the newspaper, stories that haven't been told. And really one of the most satisfying things along the way has been getting to know some of those people, telling their stories, and then hearing after the book's publication about how meaningful it is to them to have their stories told. And I've had also a lot of satisfaction from talking to lawyers who are bringing these cases, and just people who read the book and find some truth and some guidance in it. The Silver Gavel Award is intended to be awarded to people or to books or to other works that it says are exemplary in fostering the American public's understanding of law and the legal system. And that is precisely what I intended to do with Shielded. And I think that that is what makes winning this award this year one of the greatest honors that I have ever received. It's a true thrill for me, and I'm so appreciative to have been selected. Thank you.
Let's give her a round of applause. The next Silver Gavel goes to commentary, that's the category, and it's awarded for commentary goes to Kyle Whitmire from AL.com for Alabama's desperate bid for a Milligan do-over. See the video.
All this really began in 2021 when the state of Alabama made its first attempt at drawing congressional districts. And my coverage of it started then. The second act is the litigation of those maps in 2022, going all the way to the US Supreme Court. And then finally, the relitigation after Alabama had to redraw these maps again and attempt again to get it right in 2023, which is what these pieces are about. These maps were not being drawn with clean hands. The state of Alabama was attempting to, one, suppress Black representation in Alabama, and two, take another whack at the Voting Rights Act. Who drew these maps? These answers started coming out in court, and they were answers that every Alabamian really needed to hear, that the lawyers who are supposed to be representing all of Alabama in federal court were once again representing only a portion of the state's population. We see the erosion of voting rights here in Alabama, and we see the state of Alabama scheming to try to find ways to roll back the protections from the Voting Rights Act that still exist. Oftentimes, the impact of these pieces is not necessarily trying to change things from the way they are. It's to keep them from changing and regressing back to the way that they were. We need to be able to remind our audiences, sometimes ourselves, about the importance of this kind of work. But for the federal judicial system, civil rights does not exist in the state of Alabama. Voting rights do not exist in the state of Alabama. Due process does not exist in the state of Alabama. There is no march from Selma to Montgomery if not for Judge Frank Johnson ordering the state to provide protection and make a way for those marchers to get from the beginning to the end of that march. This battle for civil rights, the legal battle for it, has never stopped. It continues to this day. And we watch these sorts of cases in Alabama closely because the moment that that hand of federal protection is withdrawn, the moment it is taken away, I don't know how long these rights here continue to exist. This struggle is never over. It never ends.
Accepting the award is Mr. Kyle Whitmire.
Well, that sounded a lot better than I remembered it. When I was interviewed for that, I wasn't just talking to myself. There were other people in the conversation. Tiffany asked me, what impact has this had? What change has come about because of this body of work. And what I remember was doing a lot of tap dancing because, you know, journalists live for change. We live for impact. I work on the impact team at AL.com. Our mission statement is that we are supposed to change lives, laws, and minds. And I really didn't want to say nothing. Nothing changed. Because that sounded like the wrong answer, right? And then I reminded myself that I live and work in Alabama. When we talk about change, regression is always a possibility on the table. 2 years ago, I was working on another series that led into this series. I interviewed a state lawmaker. I've known this guy for years. I think generally he's a good person with what he thinks are good intentions, but is not necessarily mindful of what he's doing. And he had introduced a bill that would make it a crime for protesters to protest in a street or on a highway. I had to be the person to go to him and remind him that Alabama already has a law like that on its books. Only that law was ruled to be unconstitutional by U.S. District Judge Frank Johnson in 1965. You probably already have figured out what the context of that was. And when we think of the civil rights movement, when we think, you know, the images that come to mind are police dogs and fire hoses in Birmingham, or voting rights protesters being savagely beaten at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But the other aspect of that story that gets neglected are the civil rights litigators who went into federal court, who made their arguments before judges like Frank Johnson, who persuaded the federal judiciary to use that hand of protection to clear the way from Selma to Montgomery, who cleared the way for those protesters to persuade this nation to get behind the Voting Rights Act. And that hand of protection is being withdrawn. That hand of protection is going away. Shelby versus Holder originated in Shelby County, Alabama. The United States Supreme Court, when it got there, saw fit to limit the application of the Voting Rights Act. And almost immediately, the state of Alabama passed a photo voter ID bill. That was the first thing that they did. The second thing that happened was our governor at the time, Robert Bentley, began closing driver's license offices in majority black counties, making it harder for the people who live there to get the very ID that they needed to vote. When we talk about change, regression is on the table. I think that it is the duty of the press to help the Republic remember what has happened, to see what is happening now, and to make the stakes clear. And I hope that you will agree with me that I believe it is the role of our legal community, litigators, and judges in the federal courts to protect the progress that we have made and to make sure that regression does not rob us of that progress and the fruit of the sacrifices is not lost. That when nothing happens, sometimes that's not nothing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Whitmire, for those eloquent remarks. The next Silver Gavel Award is for documentaries, And the award for documentaries goes to No Accident by Catalyst Films, HBO Documentary Films, and McGee Media. Executive producers were Tina Nguyen and Nancy Abraham, HBO Documentary Films. The director was Christy Jacobson, producer Michelle Carney, editors Ali Moss and Chris Hurd, director of photography Nasheen Dada Boy, and original music by Angelica Negron.
I just heard loudness, almost like thunder.
Tiki torches still on fire. We're being thrown in our direction.
White supremacists bashed through our group with their shields.
I heard the sound of metal hitting bodies.
Robbie called me out of the blue and said, "Do you want to sue the Nazis with me?"
I've been a litigator in New York City for more than 2 decades. Charlottesville actually shocked me. I wanted the toughest possible people to help expose that. This was really a conspiracy.
It wasn't some sort of freak accident where this car ran into people. There was overt planning how to prepare for violence and make this appear as if it's self-defense.
The threat that this poses in this country, we cannot not fight back.
We found a flurry of communications. I mean, I think what we would say is there's bombshell after bombshell.
These views are not just hateful and racist, but they are
so explicitly violent,
which is the key to our case.
This is not just about what was mid-August 2017. This is about what would be in America for many decades to come.
I remember just being immediately drawn to the bravery of the plaintiffs in this lawsuit who had stood up on the days of August 11th and August 12th, 2017 against hate and in favor of dignity and equality, and had experienced trauma and then decided to be named plaintiffs in a lawsuit against some of the most violent white supremacists at the time.
When most Americans hear court, they think of the criminal justice system. Your average person does not know a lot about civil litigation. And we wanted to not only tell the story of this trial, but also tell an engaging story about the civil justice system, from the drudgery of discovery through an actual trial itself.
The project started back in 2017. Our executive producer, Dylan McGee, and one of the lead attorneys, Roberta Kaplan, had known each other for years prior. And when Robbie told Dylan about the lawsuit within days of filing it, Dylan knew immediately this was an opportunity to make a really important and powerful film.
This suit had some wild discovery, including remnants of a Discord server that was used by rally organizers, and really dramatic antagonistic depositions with white nationalists and neo-Nazis who obviously were not taking this trial very seriously. We did not want No Accident to feel like a history lesson about the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, but for people to take away an understanding of how private citizens and regular people can use civil litigation to pursue justice. The goal of the suit itself was twofold: to expose the conspirators' intent to the public and bankrupt them so that they can't do it again. I think both the trial and the film succeeded on that first count, and the second one remains to be seen because there's an appeal going on. Really good lawyers do not throw open their doors to filmmakers and say, "Come on in, just film everything." We had to really build that trust with the legal team in this case. And actually, one of the most gratifying things that came out of it for me as a filmmaker was at the end when some of the attorneys involved said, "We should have given you more access. We should have trusted you more. Now that we see what you did with it, we really just should have been more open from the get-go."
It's a huge honor for all of us, the filmmaking team, the plaintiffs, the attorneys on this lawsuit, to win this award. Filmmakers, documentary filmmakers and attorneys have so much in common. We're really here to try and expose the truth and have an impact. And we hope that winning this award will expand the impact of both the film and the lawsuit, and shows attorneys and the members of the American Bar Association how valuable it can be to allow this kind of in-depth, feature-length documentary storytelling around a lawsuit. In today's quick hits social media coverage of whether it's a lawsuit or a news event, the truth can get lost. And we're really grateful to have won this award and for the validation that it provides to all of us.
Accepting the Silver Gavel is producer Michelle Kearney.
This is heavy. Feels really good.
It's like an Oscar.
From your mouth to God's ear.
Yes.
I may repeat myself a little. I didn't realize I did a good job when they interviewed me, so apologies. A tentative logline for this documentary was a film about lawyers lawyering. So while it's always an honor to be recognized, it's really something else to be honored by a group that represents lawyers and lawyering. I'd like to use this opportunity to share a quick update. Our film ends, and this is a spoiler alert, with the news that, citing statutory limits, the judge reduced punitive damages from the roughly $24 million awarded by the jury to $350,000. Earlier this summer, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit reversed that decision and found that Virginia's punitive damages cap should be applied on a per plaintiff and not a per case basis, restoring almost $3 million in damages. More importantly, at every step of the appeals process, the courts have affirmed the jury's verdict, finding all of the defendants liable for damages caused by their racially motivated conspiracy to commit violence. On behalf of our director, Christy Jacobson, and the entire team behind No Accident, I want to thank the 9 plaintiffs who chose to stand up to white supremacy and violence instead of standing by. These were ordinary citizens who said, "Not in Charlottesville, not in my town." The legal team that fought on their behalf had just over a month to try this case. We had 90 minutes to tell their story. So there are a lot of amazing people whose work you don't see. Thank you to all of the lawyers and legal professionals at Paul Weiss, Hecker Fink, and Cooley who put in so much more than just time into this work. Deposing Nazis isn't fun. Trials only happen once, and usually only the people in the room get to see them. Films like No Accident allow us to keep the truth exposed. They allow plaintiffs' stories to stay relevant and inspire other people to see potential paths to justice for themselves and their communities. Thank you for honoring that, and I hope we can do it again.
Thank you so much for your film. That's amazing. Well, the next Silver Gavel Award is for drama and literature. And the award for drama and literature goes to Killers of the Flower Moon from Apple Original Films with Martin Scorsese, director, Eric Roth and Martin Scorsese, screenplay writers, Leonardo DiCaprio, Rick Yorn, Adam Sumner, Marianne Bauer, Lisa Frechette, John Atwood, Shay Kammer, Niles Jewell, executive producers. Dan Friedkin, Bradley Thomas, Martin Scorsese, Daniel Lupi, producers. Justin Conte, co-producer. Chad Renfro, consulting producer. Rodrigo Prieto, director of photography. Jack Fisk, production designer. Thelma Schoonmaker, editor. Mr. Scorsese, unfortunately, is not here today. He told me he was going to be here. Just kidding. But I did have the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Scorsese and Principal Chief of the Osage Nation, Jeffrey Standing Bear, earlier last year as part of the ABA Presidential Speaker Series, and he could not have been more gracious. And he actually, I urge you to watch it, it's still online, but talked about how the film really interacts with law and what happens when people become complicit in a certain kind of lawless situation. So we will play the video now.
The Osage took their name from Missouri and Osage rivers. Neokanska, children of the Middle Waters. Move, said the great white father. There are many, so many hungry wolves. Can you find the wolves in this picture? Find the wolves in this picture?
It's a period of time where there were a number of deaths that no investigations were made. And the deaths were considered, well, it was natural, they die young, they have hard lives, this and that, and all the cliches of the Native American comes into play. And in some cases, there were some murders, really not investigated properly. When we try to write the script, it was always these guys coming in solving things. What about the Osage? What about the people who are depicted only as victims? And once we found out that Ernest and Molly were very much in love, at one point, Leo just looked at me, he came to my house, he said, you know, Marty, where's the heart of the story? I said, the heart's for Molly and Ernest. He goes, well, why don't I play Ernest? And that's when everything turned around. And instead of, I always say, instead of the outside in, we were from the inside out. Well, we worked very closely with them. I mean, particularly the Osage Nation, the idea was to make it as authentic as possible. And so we had so many, we had Chief Standing Bear and Chad Renfro and Addie Romhorse and so many people helping us. And I tried to get as many elements of the culture of the Osage in the film. There was no delineation between the Osage in front of the camera and behind the camera.
I saw last night was a premiere, and it struck me how among my people there's more rage, especially the younger people. Why didn't anybody tell us more about this? There was a lot of anguish expressed even afterwards. And some call it generational trauma. I've been hearing that. But I can tell you it's real. And this movie, it has a healing effect because if you've had this sore and you're not properly treating it, it can get infected and it can spread. And I have to say that we have a lot of healing to do.
Well, I think our society today is, I don't know if we've learned anything. I think every generation has to learn. We have to teach every generation of kids it's not the way to go. Mm-hmm. Right? We have to deal with the wild youth. We know people are very excited when they're young and that sort of thing. But it's really the most important, probably most important job in the country are teachers.
Most of the resources are gone. The apparatus that allows that to happen to a great extent still exists. The remedy for this is the tribes, including Osage Nation, needs to take advantage of existing federal laws that allow for self-determination and economic self-sufficiency. Some reports show that we have had extracted from our mineral estate over 1.5 billion barrels of oil. So how can my people, any of them, be living in poverty? We weren't prepared. So we must be better prepared. And that whole system just was administered by lawyers, guardianships, partition, land partition actions, probate, all legal. But behind it was greed and often murder. And how do we determine the validity of law in situations where greed overcomes the rule of law? I mean, or some obscene search for power.
We want an audience to take away an openness to never lose their curiosity about other people, other cultures. You may not necessarily agree with everything they say, but they could open your eyes to other ways of looking at what you're doing and how you're feeling, and bring you back to a kind of grounded element that you need in your life. With all this media around and all this information, all the madness going on, you need a moment of silence. You need a moment of self-regard and maybe a better understanding of what's around us in the world.
And I will note, Chief Standing Bearer is a lawyer. The rest of the interview is available free for you online, and there's information in your program book about that. So now we will go to the Silver Gavel Award for Magazines, and the award for magazines goes to What Makes a Murderer? From the New Yorker and the Yale Investigative Reporting Lab with Sarah Stillman, writer. Sarah Stillman was not able to join us in person, but we were able to discuss the project and the award with her. So we'll look at the video.
About 10 years ago, I reported on a young woman named Rachel Hoffman who was caught with a small amount of marijuana and selling some drugs from her apartment. And the police asked her to go do a really difficult and dangerous drug bust to avoid going to prison. She was told to buy a big stash of cocaine and a handgun. And when she got there, there were two guys. One of them found the wires in her purse and shot her. But the other was actually that guy's cousin who had just kind of come along for the ride and had no idea really what he was getting into. And both men were sentenced to life in prison without parole in Florida. And that's when I learned about the felony murder rule. In many states, you can be convicted of a killing that you did not commit and did not even intend to commit if someone dies while you are engaged in the commission of another felony. Almost no states keep clear and transparent data on how they use felony murder. In a state like Florida, you can be convicted of life in prison without parole for felony murder, and your charging document says first-degree felony murder, and then when you're convicted, it just says you were convicted of first-degree murder. I profiled a young person named Lakeith Smith. He was actually charged with murder after the police killed his friend while he and several friends were robbing a home of an Xbox and some video games. The police showed up and shot and killed his friend. And Lakeith, even though everyone agreed that he was not the person who shot his friend, was prosecuted for murder. That's just one example of how in some states a third party, including a police officer, can do the killing and you can be held responsible if you were committing a felony. The racial disparities were above and beyond what we already know to be a highly racially disparate or in fact just racist criminal legal system. And we saw that reflected in rural counties where 100% and sometimes or upwards of 90% of the people convicted of felony murder were Black, and also in some big urban jurisdictions, including places where Black people were not even the majority of the population, but were very clearly being specifically targeted more often for this particular charge. I wound up learning about a really troubling case of a man named Sadiq Baxter, for example. And Sadiq in Florida had made the bad decision to try to take money from unlocked cars in a neighborhood in Florida with a friend. Someone called the police and he got arrested and put in handcuffs. And the friend around the corner was fleeing the scene and wound up being chased by police, and several miles later accidentally hit 2 bicyclists and killed them. And Sadiq, who wasn't even present at the scene, was charged with and ultimately convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder with life without parole, precisely because of the felony murder rule for the 2 murders that happened outside of his presence. Ian Amalkin was the son of one of the bicyclists who was hit, and he and his sisters, his 2 sisters, really believed that the person responsible who actually struck them accidentally, and also Sadiq, who literally wasn't even at the scene, should not go to prison for life for murder. They really, really, really believed that it was a further injustice to see 2 other people incarcerated for their father's death and 2 other families also lose their fathers, because both of the young Black men had kids, and both have been separated now from their families as well. In many, many of the cases that I profiled, the victims' families stood up and said, "We don't think this is just." The judges often said they didn't think it was just, and I heard that from judge after judge after judge. They felt that the mandatory policies required them to convict someone of life in prison without parole. But you see an incredible movement of both people convicted and their family members, but also victims standing up to say that we don't believe the felony murder rule is doing justice and that we want to see it changed.
That's a powerful film. So the next Silver Gavel Award is for multimedia. The 2024 Silver Gavel Award for multimedia goes to Your Democracy, Why Philadelphia and the Law and Policy Group, Inc., Gloria Brown Marshall, writer, host, Sarah Moses, television and video producer. And I will say it's just, full circle, because Gloria Brown Marshall was very involved in the ABA, and one of the first people I worked very closely with when I became very active in the ABA. She was very active in the section of civil rights and social justice, so it's great to see her getting this award. Unfortunately, representatives from Your Democracy were not able to join us today, but we do have a short video.
Our Constitution begins with the words, "We, the people." Those are pretty famous words. Very powerful, right? We, the people of the United States of America. That includes everybody, all of us, citizens and non-citizens. We all have constitutional rights. Well, right now we do. But back in 1787, we, the people, didn't include everybody. People of color, women, Native Americans, we had to push, pull, fight, and protest to make laws and this Constitution include equal rights for all people. A lot of hard work and sacrifice went into making this Constitution protect all the people. We, the people, have to do our part to keep it going. Our Constitution is only as strong as the work we put into it, and our democracy is only as strong as our Constitution.
We wanted to have a program that was animated, accessible, that talked about the Constitution and democracy from the standpoint of the foundation of the 3 branches of government, but also was accessible enough for someone to be interested, short segments. And so that came out of WHYY, and that was a creation that I wrote for, but they actually saw a vision beyond just talking about the Constitution and making it an animated series.
A thing that was very important to us was to express and explain information in a way that was digestible for students, but also for, adults, for people who, for whatever reason, felt like they wanted a refresher or had never really had a civics course, and really just to create a strong foundation of information so that anyone who's interested could go and watch the videos and by the end have a really good basis of understanding of how our government works. It can be deceptively simple to try to explain, how does a bill become a law? How does a case make it up to the Supreme Court? Figuring out a way to take very complex political systems and break them down into digestible, easy to understand, visual pieces of information was definitely like a learning curve for us. I know we've heard from folks who've seen the videos in France and in Denmark and really all over. What we were really just hoping is that the videos would be seen by as many people as possible and that they would come away feeling like they learned something, feeling like they either had a refresher and a new understanding and a reminder of how their government works, or maybe they're learning it for the first time, whether it's in an 8th grade civics class or, just you decided to look it up or it was fed to you.
I have worked in social justice with the idea of making law accessible, helping people to better understand their rights, helping them to see law not as an impediment always or this unknown entity that's far from them, but to actually embrace law. This is the most litigious nation in the world. We have more lawyers, more laws, more courts than any other country. We export our Constitution around the world, and yet most people have never read it. And most people don't know what's in it. They think they do, and we just wanted to empower them. So I'm just really so pleased that not only have we had hundreds of thousands of views here in the country, but people as far as Ukraine and Vietnam and Russia, the Philippines, Sweden, have viewed your democracy. The Silver Gavel Award for a lawyer, of course, is the highest honor. To know that because of that recognition, more people will be empowered and more people will better understand their rights, better understand the Constitution. And this is a nation of immigrants, people coming from all over the world can better understand this reason they should vote in the first place.
This is a huge honor for us. We also have to thank everyone who helped us out, collaborated in some way on this. Motif Motion, the amazing animation team that we worked with, Ali Lesperance, Emily Kinslow, Sandra Clark, Terry Murray, all of whom we couldn't have done this without them. Barbara and Fred Sutherland, with whom, without their grant and their very generous funding, this project would not have been possible. I have to thank my mom and my dad, who've always been there for me, always supported me when I said I wanted to make videos and make movies. Who really imparted in me the importance of civic engagement, the importance of voting, the importance of paying attention to what's going on around me in the world from a very young age.
I really want to thank the Silver Gavel Award Committee, the American Bar Association, of course you, Sarah, for all the hard work that we did under very strenuous circumstances during the pandemic. I also want to say the reason why I'm not at the ceremony today is because I'm speaking for a program in honor of John Brown, the abolitionist, and that would be the one thing that would keep me away from this remarkable event. And being able to see and embrace my friend, President Mary Smith, and see so many members of the American Bar Association with whom I've served over the years in various committees on these committees that have done so much work in social justice and civil rights. I want to thank my mom for always getting up at 6:30 in the morning on election day and making sure that she was the first person at the polls. And to thank anyone who has the opportunity to watch and to share your democracy. And remember, it's your democracy. Keep it strong.
The next Silver Gavel Award is for newspapers, and the award for newspapers goes to In the Name of Protection, The Dark Side of Guardianship, from Bloomberg Industry Group, Ronnie Green and Holly Barker, reporters, and Gary Harkey and Bernie Cohn, editors. We'll play the video.
I had just started at Bloomberg Law as an investigative reporter, and one day an editor stopped by and said, take a look at the work your colleague Holly Barker has been doing, writing about the conservatorship of Peter Max. So I looked into it and started looking into the broader issue of guardianships and very quickly saw that guardianships have sort of a collision, I think, of interest. On one hand, if you were put under a guardianship, you basically lose many of your rights. In many cases, you'll lose almost all of your rights. Yet on the other side, experts were telling us there's very little judicial and legal scrutiny in many, many of these cases. So I thought, well, that's sort of interesting that you have people losing their rights to make key daily decisions of their lives, yet maybe in a lot of cases, no one's watching.
Britney Spears' conservatorship had received just a vast amount of public attention. And it was, I think, an opportunity to build on sort of the momentum of that attention, and to sort of seize on that, because it's not a Britney Spears problem. Most people don't have the platform that she has or the ability to advocate in quite the same way for themselves.
We found so many cases where abuse has occurred because no one was watching very closely. One of the cases that Holly and I worked on very closely together was the case out of New Mexico involving a private guardianship company that over more than a decade defrauded millions of dollars from clients who really needed help. And the thing that was one of the many, many things that was striking to me about that case was year after year after year, this company was able to get state contracts without anyone sort of noticing what was going on behind the scenes. And all of the people under guardianship who were being abused under their watch, defrauded, and mistreated. This company then used the profits it was gaining from its state contracts and also its federal contracts to sort of live very largely. So that's just one case where we found that these abuses can occur because no one's really asking questions.
It's really problematic that there are so many for-profit guardianship organizations. When you have a group that's this vulnerable, their assets are being handed over to more or less strangers in many cases. We found also that in a lot of these states, it's fractured and it's all very localized. There are reporting mechanisms and there are systems that purport to serve as oversight measures. They aren't really honored.
There's no uniformity. There's no limit nationwide in how many cases, for instance, a professional guardian can take. We found one case in Indiana where one professional guardian had more than 400 clients over a couple of year period.
And in some cases, due to privacy concerns, the records are just sealed altogether. There has been some legislation proposed at the federal level that would require basically sort of a Bill of Rights for people who are determined to be in need of a guardianship. I am frankly skeptical that we'll see any sort of solution at the federal level for people who might find themselves in need of care in their golden years. Hopefully this can help them sort of think about how to plan around that, how to draft documents to let their family members know sort of exactly how they want all of this to proceed.
And accepting the Silver Gavel are reporters Ronnie Green and Holly Barker.
Thank you very much for this very meaningful and prestigious honor. Guardianships we found in the best sense can be good and can be meaningful for those who need them, older adults who need guardianship help late in their life, or maybe a younger adult who has issues that are significant. But Holly and I found sort of systemically across the country is so many guardianships are approved without people really thinking about what's going to be happening. Sometimes we found people put under guardianships were not really clear about what was going to happen for them, not really clear about the decisions being made for them. And we found really on very granular levels, once you're under a guardianship, your ability to make even basic decisions often is taken away from you. In one case, a young man who suffered a serious accident and lost his ability to make decisions had fully recovered but remained under a guardianship and needed permission to buy diapers for his daughter, needed permission to buy a new car. We found a young woman in Indiana was under a guardianship, and the bills for her guardianship were so high, one day she wanted to have a yard sale to raise money. She needed permission to do that. And we found these kind of cases over and over again. We found a case in Georgia where a judge improperly took away the rights of a young adult placed under a guardianship, took away her right to vote, took away her right to drive, took away her right to write checks. So what we found really across the board was so many guardianships were approved without the person really knowing what they were getting into, and there were not enough cases where those put under guardianship had really strong legal advocates representing just them, not necessarily representing the court's interest, not representing the guardian's interests, but representing the interest of the person under guardianship. And in the case we talked about on the interview in New Mexico, what was mind-boggling about that was this company was ostensibly hired to protect the most vulnerable, protect veterans coming back, protect people with mental health issues, yet they, year after year, stole up to $12 million from those under their watch. And year after year, the state of New Mexico kept approving their contracts. And what were they doing with the money? They were buying box seats to local college basketball games. They were buying Mercedes-Benzes. They were traveling the world, and no one was watching. And I guess the final thing I would say is this recognition is deeply meaningful. What this says is that more people should be paying attention. And then every case when someone files a petition to put someone under a guardianship, someone should be watching to make sure that it's the right thing. And so thank you very much for this very meaningful honor. We greatly appreciate it.
The next Silver Gavel Award is for radio, and the award for radio goes to The Nocturnist, Post-Row America podcast by The Nocturnist, with Dr. Allie Block, host creator, Dr. Emily Silverman, co-creator, Molly Rose Williams, lead producer editor, Sam Osborne, producer, editor, audio engineer, Jessica Young, producer, editor, John Oliver, audio engineer, Carly Besser, assistant producer, Rebecca Groves, chief operating officer, Nicole Zhu, series illustrator, Anjali Walia, Dahlia Kaki, Fiona Miller, Mulki Mohari, and Treya Tompkins, student producers. We'll play the video.
On June 24, 2022, the United States Supreme Court issued the Dobbs decision. Overnight, Americans lost the protections on abortion care that Roe v. Wade had afforded for almost 50 years. Soon afterward, the Nocturnist began talking to abortion providers around the country.
I was in my office and I was getting up to go see a patient, and I got that alert. I was like holding back tears when I walked in to go see this patient, got out of there, and went back to my office and I cried.
In that moment, that person is looking at you like, why can't you help me? They don't need to reckon with the state and this law and who passed it and who introduced it, and that's not important to them. You're a doctor, help me.
Calls to the hotline just started coming in, one after another, after another, after another. People were sitting in the parking lot or they were sitting in the clinic waiting room and they wanted to know what they could do.
It's chaos. It's chaos and confusion.
Sometimes we're asked, like, what do you think abortion looks like in 10 years? And it's like, holy moly, out of 10 years, I'm worried about what it looks like in 6 months.
What can we learn from the providers at the heart of this crisis? What kinds of choices did they face? And what was the fallout for them and their communities?
As soon as the Dobbs decision came down in 2022, we at The Nocturnist knew that we wanted to do a series on what would now be post-Roe v. Wade America. I have a ton of colleagues and friends who are abortion providers all over the country who were really immediately seeing the effects of the Dobbs decision. It's one thing to say abortion is over, abortion is illegal, and it's another thing to talk to a doctor who works in a banned state about what that looked like on the day and in the months and years that followed. And a lot of the abortion providers that we talked to talked a lot about how we were sort of already living in what we call a post-Roe America or a pre-Roe America, even though there was a constitutional protection for abortion care in theory throughout the land and through all 50 states, you saw huge discrepancies in what was really happening on the ground in terms of access to care. And that had a lot to do with local restrictions and laws that had been in place for a long time. So it was already really hard to get an abortion for many pregnant people in certain states, either because of legislation or just people of color, people of low income who have less access to care in general and more barriers to care. Dobbs really just sort of brought to the fore something that was already a trend that we already knew. The same skills, the same procedures that we use for abortion are the same ones that we use for miscarriage management, for impending miscarriage, for non-viable pregnancies, for fatal fetal anomalies, for ectopic pregnancies, all of these situations where doctors really need these skills and need to be able to use their own clinical judgment about when they're going to perform a procedure and need to not have legislators be getting in the way of that. There's this sort of myth of the good abortion and the bad abortion. You know, the people who just get pregnant irresponsibly and were using abortion as birth control versus, the person that was trying so hard for so long to get pregnant and found out that they had a fatal anomaly and that they need an abortion. Those are two sort of specific examples, but there's a million examples of why people need an abortion. At the end of the day, there's actually only one reason why someone needs an abortion, which is that they don't want to be pregnant with that pregnancy. They don't want to carry that pregnancy to term. In a lot of states like Idaho and Tennessee that at first, had exceptions for things like rape and incest and health and life of the mother, those have sort of gone away. The legislators really just don't care about the health of pregnant people and sort of prioritize the life and wellness of the fetus at all costs, and also, frankly, their own sort of political agenda. And when they voted for these laws, they were sort of just virtue signaling to their party. The laws were not written by medical professionals. And so a lot of healthcare providers in those immediate days when Roe was overturned were just totally lost in their healthcare spaces, not knowing what was legal and what was not. The laws were so unclear and so vague because the legislators didn't know what they were doing. Women would come into the ER hemorrhaging with a miscarriage, and they would have to worry that in treating her and saving her life, they would be charged with a felony. Since roughly half of the population has the potential for pregnancy in their life, that really affects all of us. So it's that kind of awareness that we were really hoping to spread with this series. Thank you so much to the ABA and the Silver Gavel Awards. On behalf of the Nocturnists, we are so appreciative to be recognized for our work on the Post-Roe America series, and it really means a lot to have an esteemed professional organization like the ABA recognize the work that we do. It was a big team that worked on this project to get the stories of healthcare providers and abortion providers, especially working in banned and restricted states, out there in the world. We're so proud of the work that we did. I'd like to thank a whole bunch of people. So first and foremost, and always, my partner, the creator and host of The Nocturnist, Dr. Emily Silverman. Also, we had amazing producers working on this series, Molly Rose Williams, Sam Osborne, and Jessica Young. A very talented audio engineer, John Oliver. A bunch of student producers that really helped us with our resources, Anjali Walia, Dahlia Kaki, Fiona Miller, Milpi Mahari, and Treya Tompkins. We had an assistant producer, Carly Besser, and other team members, Rebecca Groves and Ashley Petit. So that's the Nocturnist team, but of course, the biggest thank you from me always is to the abortion providers doing this work throughout the country. It's really hard work. It's really heartfelt work. And everybody that I know that does it puts their whole heart and souls into it. And we're so honored that you shared your stories with us. And so this award really is from us a love letter to you. Thank you so much for all the work that you do throughout the country supporting reproductive rights and freedoms.
The Nocturnists were not able to attend today, but you can stream all of their shows wherever you get your podcasts. So the final Silver Gavel Award goes for television, and the award goes to Warehoused. The Life and Death of Tristan Murphy, CBS News, Miami. Jim DeFried, writer, reporter, producer. Alexander Bombard, editor. Leon Gonzalez, Adam Spunt, and Joaquim Garcia, photographers. Angela Travaglieso and Judy Fluke, design and graphics. Monica Kirkland and Tracy Latisse, marketing and programming. Carrie Pate, news director. Kim Vogt, president and general manager. Lily Roos, Mark Memott, Jack Renaud, and Thomas Burke, legal and standards. We'll look at the video.
I saw the guy trying to turn on the chainsaw, grabbed it up to his neck, moved it from side to side. He's gotta be a genuine schizophrenic. He's 1968. That chopped his head off.
How could somebody who with a mental health condition be given access to a chainsaw?
What's your name? Could you look at the camera?
We have created a system designed to fail, and it fails perfectly. And then we blame the poor soul who has the mental illness when we never gave them the opportunity to recover to begin with.
It makes no sense. I mean, it is just so wrong.
The judicial system fails to the mentally ill in the United States.
Adult antisocial behavior, psychotic disorder with delusions.
So wait a minute, this guy's an inmate and he had access to a chainsaw?
They knew. There were people in that facility that knew, that should have put red flags all around him. Should not have happened. Should not have happened. It was in his records, prior suicide attempts. Mental illness. How?
The same day that Tristan Murphy took his life, I got a tip from inside the prison that something horrific had happened and that everybody knew in the institution that this person had a mental illness. And yet they gave him a chainsaw and allowed him to try to cut his head off. And so it took me the better part of 3 days to even get the State Department of Corrections to confirm that somebody had died at a prison facility. They were doing the best they could to try to keep it a secret, to hide it from the public. The resistance of getting any information from the state made me believe that there was something deeper at play here. When I met and talked to Cindy Murphy, his mother, the state had failed to even tell her. She didn't know what had occurred and the fact that he was diagnosed schizophrenic, but had failed to receive any treatment, had failed to receive his medication. Cindy Murphy wanted to get answers about her son's death. She understood how to act as his guardian after his death and therefore be able to request his records. Getting those records took time, but I'm glad that we did it that way because the first time that anybody knew that Tristan Murphy had died publicly was when we did the story 2 years later. The state had managed to cover it up for 2 years, seeing and hearing what took place that day when those Miami-Dade police officers showed up at the scene, turned on their body cameras, and started interviewing not just prison staff, but also other inmates. That's when you realize, just how bad a situation this was. Here were inmates saying, we all knew he was crazy. As soon as they handed him a chainsaw, I stepped away from him because I thought he was either going to hurt himself or hurt me. You could actually see these inmates and what they were saying. You could see the prison officials talking, some laughing about what had occurred. You may not want to care about a guy who's in a prison, who's mentally ill and who takes his own life, but you should, and here's why. And that video went a long way towards explaining what took place. Several legislators, were outraged by it. The Florida legislature this year and Governor Ron DeSantis just signed a few weeks ago a bill to overhaul the Baker Act, which is the involuntary commitment program in which individuals who are at risk to themselves or others can be hospitalized for up to 72 hours. The Baker Act has been around for more than 50 years. but it has never been reformed. You take people off the street, like Tristan Murphy, who never should have been in a prison to begin with, and you arrest them, and you end up Baker acting them, as the phrase goes down here. And as a result, they go to a mental health facility for 72 hours. And then after the 72 hours, they're released back out on the street with no follow-up care, no aftercare, nothing. There's very little sympathy for prisoners to begin with. And then you add in there mentally ill prisoners, and most of society doesn't care. Jails and prisons are stocked with people who have mental illnesses. And if they don't start receiving treatment, if we don't start finding diversion plans to get them away from incarceration and into treatment, then we're all going to be worse off for it.
You may stream the Warehoused episode on Paramount Plus and YouTube. Jim DeFede is covering the Florida primary election, and so he's not able to be here today, but he did send a recorded thank you, so take a look.
I want to thank the American Bar Association, the members of the Standing Committee for the Gavel Awards, and ABA President Mary Smith for this tremendous honor. This story started with a phone call, a tip that a mentally ill prisoner had killed himself by trying to cut his head off with a chainsaw. I would eventually learn the young man's name was Tristan Murphy, and he had been sent to prison on a littering charge. A littering charge. At the time, I didn't realize this would be the start of a 2-year journey exploring how the criminal justice system treats and largely fails those with mental illnesses, warehousing them instead of treating them. Now, I realize I don't need to tell those in this room that the Bar Association has long been a leader in trying to bring needed reform on this issue. And when I spoke recently to Tristan's mother, Cindy, she wanted me to thank you for your efforts, but she also wanted me to urge you to do more, so that other mothers don't have the experience and the pain that she has been forced to endure as she now raises Tristan's 2 young boys, Colton and Cody. I also want to thank my bosses at CBS News, who also did not realize this would be the start of a 2-year investigation, but who understood the importance of this story and gave me the time and resources to tell this story the way it needed to be told. And as you can imagine, I did not do this story alone, and I want to thank my editor, Alex Bombard, my photographers, Leon Gonzalez, Joaquin Garcia, Rafael Marciano, and Adam Spunt, as well as the incredible design team at CBS Miami, Angie Travieso and Judy Fluke, as well as many others who do not get the recognition I'm receiving today. Finally, I do want to take a moment and thank Cindy Murphy for trusting me to tell Tristan's story. This was not easy for her. I have watched as this quiet, shy woman has adopted the role of tireless advocate, traveling to the state capitol in Florida and demanding action from state legislators. There should be awards for people like her, and so I accept this on behalf of her as well. By highlighting stories like this one, as well as the incredible work of the other storytellers being honored today, the American Bar Association recognizes the critical role the press plays in keeping the public informed. And as the saying goes, an informed citizenry is needed for our survival as a free people. It also shows that rather than hide from scrutiny, the American Bar Association welcomes it. And in these perilous days, that spirit is needed now more than ever. Thank you.
Well, please join me in a final round of applause for all the 2024 Gavel Award winners. And as we get to the conclusion of the program, I want to thank several people who made this all possible. First, Steve Wormeal, thank you for your help in presenting these awards today and for your outstanding leadership as chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Gavel Awards. I would also like to thank the individual members of the Standing Committee on Gavel Awards and all the 50 members of its screening committee for their dedication to judging entries. And finally, but not least, it's probably most important, thanks so much to the staff at the ABA's Division for Public Education, particularly Frank Valdez and Tiffany Middleton, for making this all possible and all the work they do every day. Thank you. And so thanks to all of you for attending today and watching this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and it's been such a thrill having this program back at the ABA annual meeting. It's been wonderful, and now please enjoy some food and drink, and then I wish you the best for the rest of your evening. So thank you for joining us today. Thank you.